Just talk about Wrigley Field, just take one step back, and this is the ballpark that actually the Cubs played in before they came to Wrigley Field. This is the West Side Park, and this image is a classic image of the original crosstown rivalry, the city championship that was in 1909. So this is the kind of ballpark that the team was playing in, heavy timber construction, lots of fans, double-decker, and this was sort of an image of a typical ballpark of that time. This field came to being in 1914. Weigman Field was created by Charles Weigman. He had a baseball team, the Chicago Federals. It was a very short-lived league, the Federal League, and he needed a ballpark, so he built this stadium. The original part of this stadium was constructed in less than 2 months, which is a really phenomenal thing when you think about it. And much of this building that was built in 1914, and you see it here in the spring of 1914, and this is it finished. They were ready for opening day on April 23rd, so in less than 2 months they built this park that held 14,000 people. And the structure that is existing in this image that you see on the screen is behind you today, still there. Here's another image from that rainy day on May 5th. The original scoreboard was built in 1915, and it lasted until the one that you see in center field replaced it in 1938. And there are the Cubs kids on the top of the stand, or the scoreboard there. But the man that really transformed the place and the team was, of course, William Wrigley, who actually was a partner with Weigman when the Shy Feds, as they were known, became the Whales. That was 2 years. In 1915, they went out of business. The league went bankrupt. And so Weigman, along with Wrigley and several other men, were given the option to buy the Cubs, which they did. And they moved the Cubs from that West Side Park to Weigman Park here on the north side, and they renamed it Cubs Park. And it remained Cubs Park until Wrigley bought out Weigman's shares in the team, basically bought everyone out, and became Wrigley Field around 1920. At that same time, and I know we're here to talk about baseball, but you can't talk about Wrigley Field without mentioning the Bears. That was mentioned earlier. And in 1921, the Chicago Bears, the newly formed Chicago Bears, moved to Chicago. And you see George Halas on your right in the middle row there. He brought the Bears to Chicago, made a deal with Wrigley to play the Bears games here in this field, in this park. And that was one of the impetuses for increasing the size, the capacity of the field, which they did. And this is how the field looked. This is in the 1960s, sort of its mature years, but you can see the orientation for how the stadium was used. In order to accomplish that, they actually took the old stadium. This is, again, an image of the 1914, sort of a roof plan looking down at it, and they had extended the seating here, the concrete part, in 1920, 21. But what they did is they actually cut the thing apart and pulled back that corner piece, that curving corner piece, pushed it out towards the corner of Clark and Addison, and then they filled in those two sections you see there, the gray sections. They filled those in 1923. So that the stadium that we see now is basically that 1923 stadium as was finished at that time. And this is what the outside of it looked like. An architect named Zachary Davis, who was the original 1914 designer, also created the 1922 version with its very beautiful grill work that ran around the outside, as well as these fun little ticket booths that had tile roofs on them and so on. Very characteristic of what the outside of the building looked like. The next major expansion occurred in 1927-28 when they built the upper deck. And this was done by the architectural firm Graham, Anderson, Probst & White. Any of you that know Chicago architecture know the name of that firm. Did many, many buildings, important buildings at that time here in town. But what they did is they took and just added on to the top of that 1914, 1921 structure. I don't know how well you can see this, but you can see the original roof of the 1914 structure, and then they just added the upper deck. And this is, in fact, the upper deck that's up there today, although it has been worked on some. This is what that completion looked like in 1929, the grandstands with the upper deck. basically almost doubling the capacity of the stadium from about 20,000 to 38,000. This is how it looked on the outside from that famous corner of Clark and Addison. This is before the marquee went up. Again, 1928. You can see the booths and the grill work that's there. So the outfield did have some bleachers, but they didn't have enough bleacher seating, particularly when they had the good fortune of getting into the World Series, which they did on a number of occasions in the 20s and 30s. In fact, we're very fortunate they did. A lot of these photographs that I'm showing you come from those times. This is the famous 32 World Series that was just mentioned, where Babe Ruth supposedly pointed to the outfield and then put the ball in the bleachers. Here you see the outfield, the extension of the bleachers that were built out on temporary scaffolding out in both Waveland and on the Sheffield side. And in this image, perhaps, well, you can't really see it, probably because you have the glare, but if you could see it, you can see how they really extended and expanded the bleachers. So this was an ongoing problem, and in 1937, there was a decision made to actually create permanent bleachers out there that would increase the capacity of the seating here to close to 40,000. And along with that, they built the famous scoreboard that you see. And the man that's credited with this is Bill Veeck Jr. Bill Veeck Sr. had actually been the president of the Cubs during the 20s, and so his son was hanging around the ballpark a lot. And the story is that even as a 13-year-old, he thought it would be a neat idea to plant ivy in the outfield. And he finally got that dream to be fulfilled. Here's some images of the workers in 37, the riveters putting together the steel structure that's still underneath there now. And here they are planting the ivy in 1937. And of course, that's one of the most beloved and characteristic features of the building. Here are the bleachers once they were completed in 37. The scoreboard is under construction. You can see that they moved the original scoreboard to the left field. Finished image of that in 38. And then the clock, the famous clock that we still see today, although it originally had a white face, now it's got a green face, but anyway, it's the same clock. 1941 that was added. So here's the finished park with its boomerang bleachers. That's the shape that you see in this old postcard scene. Here it is from the outside looking on Addison. And this is the image from the air, and it's basically the same as it is today. This is taken in 38. Again, you can see the boomerang shape of the bleachers. And here's some shots from the 70s. You can see downtown the newly completed Hancock building and the Standard Oil building, as it was called at the time. And really very few changes occurred after that 38 image, except that they added some things and deleted some things. They took off the ticket booths. They took out the famous, the beautiful grillage, and they added these not very attractive concrete panels, which I'm sure were more durable at the time, but have certainly not beloved by anyone, and that they are hoping to take off. They've already been taking some of them off, and the rest should come off soon, we hope. Then the big move in 1988 when they added the lights. This was quite controversial, as Ernie Banks said, that Wrigley was known for its day games, but they felt they needed to have some night games, so there was a lot of negotiation with the community, and they were able to do it. And I think you can see, as we sit here today, it really hasn't detracted from the qualities of the ballpark that make it so important to us today. The last major move was when they extended the bleachers, and you can see it as we sit here, probably better than you can see it in the image. But basically, leaving the brick wall intact, they cantilevered out over the street, increasing the seating capacity up to almost, a little over 41,000 seats, which puts it pretty much in the middle of all the major league ballparks that are out there today. The importance of the building is recognized by the fact that it was made a city landmark in 2004. It's certainly a landmark in its just in the quality and nature, but it's a legal landmark, which means that the city has the regulatory power to control any changes that would go on here. And basically it means that anything you can see from a public space, so that's the outside and the inside, are all under that control, including the ivy, which is written into the ordinance. Why would you do that? Well, the loss of all the great ballparks across the country, particularly in Chicago, we lost Comiskey Park in 1900, 1910, so it was one of the oldest parks that existed. It was a beautiful park, had a lot of architectural ornamentation. That was demolished in 1990, not that long ago, and there really wasn't much of a discussion about it. Wrigley is much more in the people's hearts, I guess, and there was a big fight about keeping it, and therefore it was made a landmark. But this image or idea of architecture and what does it mean to be a ballpark, taking on the cues of these old classic jewel box ballparks like Comiskey and Fenway and Wrigley. Here's Fenway Park with its ornamentation. And of course, the new fad became retro ballparks. How do we go back and look like an old ballpark with brick and arches, both at the Orioles Stadium, Camden Yards in Baltimore, and now with the Colorado Rockies Park, the new Busch Stadium with its arches, looking back on Ebbets Field as the precursor to that, and of course, the Mets' new stadium is a dead ringer almost for that old Ebbets Field. But here in Chicago, we don't have to look at a false tradition. We don't have to look back on the past to try to draw something new. We actually have it here. And I think the thing about Wrigley that's so fantastic and endearing and lasting is just what Ernie Banks was talking about. All the memories that are embodied here, all the things that people remember how it was and how it could be, it's still here physically. It's physically here, and all it needs is a little enhancement, a little restoration, and the fans will continue to come as they always have come, and making it a dynamic, exciting place and an experience that not only your first time to a ball game, but every time you come to a ball game at Wrigley, we'll have that for you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.